They say the story of Lady Winthrop's portrait begins long before the first brushstroke touched canvas, in whispers among servants and distant acquaintances, in letters hidden in attics. No record exists of the artist who painted it, nor of the commission, yet the painting appeared in the Winthrop estate in 1843, its presence recorded in journals, diaries, and estate ledgers. What survives now are only accounts from those who once lived in proximity to it, stories told generations later, when Lady Winthrop herself and all who had known her were gone. The estate, a sprawling manor on the outskirts of Kent, was already considered remote. Fog draped the grounds like a shroud, curling along cobblestone paths and pooling in the hollows of the gardens. Inside, servants whispered of cold draughts where no window stood open, of doors closing of their own accord, and of mirrors that reflected figures long absent. Lady Winthrop, a woman in her mid-30s with high cheekbones and an unyielding gaze, maintained strict control over her household. She insisted the portrait remain displayed in the main gallery, lit by candle sconces that cast long shadows across the walls. At first, the painting drew admiration. Lady Winthrop's likeness was hauntingly precise. Her eyes, a pale gray, seemed almost translucent, reflecting candlelight like liquid silver. Her posture was composed, regal, yet her lips carried a subtle, enigmatic curl, neither smile nor frown. Visitors remarked on the realism, on the uncanny way her gaze followed them across the gallery. Yet admiration gave way to unease when small incidents began to occur. The first was the gardener, Thomas Hale. A week after the portrait's arrival, he was found in the greenhouse, eyes wide and staring, clutching a pruning knife. His journal later revealed entries of strange visions, shadows flitting across walls, whispers from corners, and, most disturbingly, the sensation that the woman in the painting had spoken to him. He claimed she had warned him to mind the space beneath the floor, though what he meant remained unclear. Within days, Thomas died of a sudden fever. Those who knew him swore his death had been preceded by days of intense terror, as if some unseen force had pursued him relentlessly. Lady Winthrop herself recorded the next incidents in her private diary, locked away for decades. Her words were meticulous, controlled, yet trembled beneath the surface with fear. She noted that the portrait's eyes seemed to shift when unobserved, narrowing ever so slightly, widening when she approached. Candles flickered when she passed, drafts swirled inexplicably, and mirrors reflected her not as she appeared, but older, pallid, as if drained of life. Yet the painting was immovable. Attempts to cover it with drapery failed. Each morning the fabric would lie neatly folded at the base of the frame, as though placed there by unseen hands. The third incident involved the estate's librarian, Mr. Edmund Croft. He was cataloguing rare volumes when he claimed to hear Lady Winthrop's voice emanating from the gallery. Cross-legged on the floor, he described the sound as distant yet precise, like the echo of a whispered secret traveling across space and time. He swore the voice recited phrases in Latin he did not recognize, recounting names and dates of individuals who had not yet come into the world, or perhaps those who had already died. Mr. Croft was found days later, unresponsive, muttering the same phrases in his sleep. His death was officially attributed to a stroke, though household accounts suggested he had aged visibly in the days leading up to it. Hair grayed unnaturally, skin wan and fragile. By the winter of 1844, the estate had grown tense, haunted by silent dread. Visitors began declining invitations to the Winthrop manor. Servants who had previously spoken freely now whispered in corners, avoiding the gallery. Lady Winthrop herself was observed pacing nightly, eyes fixed upon the portrait, murmuring warnings in a tone too soft for anyone else to hear. In one letter to a distant cousin, she wrote, "I cannot leave it, nor can I ignore it. Each night it watches, and I feel its measure, as though it counts my very breaths. I dare not turn my back, and yet I long to close my eyes." Her own family soon began to experience inexplicable tragedies. Her younger brother, visiting from London, was found lifeless in the library, a single bruise on his temple, the only visible mark. A cousin in Paris reportedly fell ill after sending a letter detailing her concern about the portrait, dying within a fortnight. Even the household cat, normally aloof, hissed violently at the gallery, refusing to enter the room for weeks. The estate historian, consulted decades later, would note that the deaths followed a curious pattern. Each individual who lingered too long near the portrait experienced a rapid decline, often preceded by visions, whispers, or inexplicable chills. The painting, it seemed, was not merely a likeness, but a vessel, a conduit for something beyond comprehension. Yet despite its terror, Lady Winthrop could not part with it. She claimed she understood the rules. Those who resisted its pull vanished. Those who observed with restraint were merely counted. In the spring of 1845, the manor hosted a gathering of intellectuals and artists. Several observed the portrait directly, reporting strange sensations: a tightening in the chest, a shiver across the spine, the fleeting impression of movement beneath the gallery floor. One visiting painter fainted upon attempting a sketch, claiming the eyes of Lady Winthrop's likeness had shifted and narrowed with intent. Another guest awoke that night to the sound of whispered counting, emanating from the gallery itself, soft but precise. The final account from Lady Winthrop's own hand describes her last confrontation with the portrait. She wrote, "Tonight I dared to speak, to ask why. The eyes blinked not, yet I felt the answer in the marrow of my bones. It desires observation, not interference. I have watched. I have obeyed. I fear the time will come when it will watch alone, and I will be called." Within days, Lady Winthrop fell ill. Her attendants reported a pale, still figure in bed, murmuring phrases in a voice not entirely her own. When she passed, the household noted the air in the gallery shifted, heavy and oppressive, as if mourning her absence. The portrait remained, untouched, eyes unwavering. Years later, visitors to the Winthrop estate, then largely abandoned, described the same effects. The air around the gallery felt charged. Instruments failed. Candles flickered without cause. Shadows stretched unnaturally, coalescing near the frame. The painting itself was described as alive in the strictest sense. It watched, it measured, and it waited for those who dared approach. By the early 20th century, the Winthrop estate fell into ruin. The portrait was removed during renovations and reportedly passed through a series of collectors, each meeting a mysterious end. Newspapers occasionally recorded deaths attributed to natural causes, yet in each case, journals, letters, or servant accounts suggested an underlying presence. The same cold watchfulness, the same counting eyes. And so, the tale persists. Lady Winthrop's portrait remains a figure of fascination and fear. To this day, accounts describe it as unmovable, impervious, yet unnervingly precise in its attention. Those who linger too long feel it measure their heartbeats, count their breaths, and catalogue their existence. The painting is no longer merely an object of art. It is a testament to the peril of observation, a cautionary relic from 1843 that lingers long after its original owners have vanished into memory. The last surviving witness, a distant maid's granddaughter interviewed decades later, whispered that the portrait's eyes remember everything, and they wait. By the time the 1850s arrived, the portrait had acquired a reputation that extended beyond Kent. Scholars, artists, and the curious sought it out, though few lingered long. Each account repeated the same eerie pattern: subtle unease, sudden chills, whispers in empty rooms, shadows that moved independently of their sources. And with each new observer, another record of a sudden, mysterious death appeared. One collector, Sir Reginald Thornton, took the painting to London in 1854, installing it in a private gallery beneath gaslight chandeliers. His servants reported nights of inexplicable sounds, soft footsteps pacing the gallery, the faint rustle of fabric as if someone unseen brushed past the walls. Sir Reginald himself claimed he saw figures standing just beyond the corners of the frame, motionless, watching. Within 3 months, he fell ill. No physician could explain his symptoms: fever, pallor, sudden convulsions, each more severe than the last. When he passed, the gallery attendants insisted they saw a shadow linger over the portrait, bowing slightly, almost reverently. A decade later, in 1866, the painting had moved to the estate of Lady Marjorie Kingsley. She prided herself on her knowledge of the supernatural, collecting artifacts rumored to carry unusual power. When the portrait arrived, she noted in her diary a faint metallic scent that lingered in the gallery, distinct from the varnish or aged canvas. Nights brought strange dreams, rows of figures standing shoulder to shoulder, observing silently, cataloguing. She awoke one morning with claw-like impressions along her forearms, unexplained and precise. Her guests were equally affected. One man, an amateur painter, attempted to sketch the portrait in candlelight and fainted immediately, awaking to find the sketch entirely blank, save for the faint imprint of an eye that seemed impossibly alive. Lady Marjorie herself recorded that the eyes of the portrait seemed to shift slightly when she looked away, a subtle adjustment that left her stomach heavy with dread. Within a month, she was found lifeless in her gallery chair, her face pale and eyes wide as though frozen, in the act of witnessing something beyond the veil. The legend grew. Each owner's household kept meticulous records, diaries, letters, and logs detailing the subtle manipulations of the painting. It did not act violently, nor did it move, nor did it cry out. Its influence was far more insidious. It observed, measured, and waited. Visitors often reported an uncanny sensation, as if the air had thickened around the painting, as though time itself slowed when the eyes were upon them. In 1872, the portrait found its way to a private collector in Scotland, Sir Alistair Fenton. By this point, the painting's history was already whispered in select circles. Sir Alistair, skeptical of superstition, kept it behind locked glass. Yet even behind the thick protective case, visitors described tremors of unease, shadows flickering without source, and a cold that seemed to pool near the frame. One evening, a maid who had polished the gallery for decades reported seeing the eyes of Lady Winthrop blink, slowly, deliberately, though she could swear she had left the room before sunset. Sir Alistair, deriding her claim, died that night of sudden heart failure. In every household, the sequence remained: observe, feel counted, succumb. Those who resisted often fled, yet death or disappearance invariably followed within weeks. The painting had become a silent arbiter, an unseen force enforcing a precise, inexorable order. By the late 19th century, records show that the portrait had begun to move between collectors with increasing caution. Families refused it outright, and those who inherited it quickly sold or donated it. Letters from auction houses note unusual occurrences during display: candles extinguishing in long rows, temperature drops measured by thermometers, clocks stopping precisely when one faced the painting. Witnesses reported hearing faint whispers, fragments of Latin, or a voice as delicate as silk but impossibly close, uttering names of those present in the room. One particularly detailed account from 1891 describes a visitor who spent an hour staring at the portrait. He later recounted that he felt each of his breaths counted, as though the canvas measured not just observation, but life itself. By midnight, he experienced tremors in his limbs, vertigo, and a profound nausea, culminating in unconsciousness. He survived, though pale and shaken, and insisted upon writing his observations at length. The eyes did not merely watch, they remembered, and those remembered were catalogued for a reckoning that would come later, whether days, weeks, or decades hence. Throughout these decades, scholars debated the origin of the painting. Some suspected a cursed brush, others a malevolent spirit trapped in oil and canvas. Lady Winthrop herself remained a mystery. No records suggest she intended the portrait to cause harm. Yet in every account, a subtle pattern emerged. The portrait did not kill recklessly. It selected carefully. Each victim had gazed too long, lingered too close, or sought to defy it in thought or deed. Resistance brought death. Compliance, observation without interference, brought survival, if only temporarily. By the turn of the century, the painting's path grew more erratic. It passed through private estates in England and France, always leaving a trail of unease, illness, or sudden death. Accounts became more detailed, corroborated by servants, visitors, and physicians. One French diplomat recorded the sensation of the portrait following him across a gallery. Every time he turned his head, the eyes were present, assessing, calculating. Within 2 weeks, he fell gravely ill, unable to leave his bed. His physician noted the symptoms were inexplicable: pallor, vertigo, and what he described in writing as a haunting fatigue, as though his very life force had been measured and partially withdrawn. In 1910, the portrait returned to London, sold at auction to a collector who prided himself on rationality. He kept it under lock and key, but accounts from household staff note that at night, the eyes seemed to move even behind glass, pupils narrowing, as if seeking some recognition. One night, a governess reported the faint sound of counting emanating from the gallery, soft, deliberate, 3 beats, a pause, 3 more, repeating until dawn. The last documented owner, in 1924, refused to discuss it publicly. Family letters recovered in the 1960s describe a long hallway, doors bolted, curtains drawn, servants leaving the room for hours at a time. Occasionally, one would glimpse a figure reflected in the glass of the frame that did not belong to anyone present. The painting, it seems, had become more than a representation. It had become an arbiter, a witness, a collector of life. Today, the portrait is believed to reside in private hands, its location undisclosed. Scholars who study cursed artifacts speculate endlessly, piecing together fragments of letters, diaries, and newspaper accounts. The legacy remains consistent. Every owner dies under mysterious circumstances, each individual counted, measured, and catalogued by the cold gaze of Lady Winthrop herself. Some claim that the painting watches still, indifferent yet patient. Those who see it in passing, in old estate sales or glimpsed through museum archives, report a chill running down their spine, an awareness of being observed. Scholars warn against lingering too long, cautioning that the portrait does not forget. Those who have survived its gaze often describe dreams of halls lined with silent figures, all watching, all recording, and always, always counting. Even now, nearly 2 centuries later, the tale persists. It is no longer merely a story of art. It is a record of warning, a lesson in attention, patience, and the subtle cruelty of a gaze that measures existence itself. Lady Winthrop's portrait endures as it always has, silent, observing, immortal, and sometimes those who linger too long, who stare too deeply at historical reproductions or photographs, swear they feel the same sensation, accounting, soft but inexorable, as if the eyes of the painting have found them again, and the record continues.